This is Learn It from an 80s Song. Today we have a very special and heroic guest. Please welcome Dr. Erica Martinez. Dr. Martinez is a registered nurse with nearly 20 years of experience spanning frontline nursing, teaching, and leadership. She is currently on the front lines of COVID-19 and one of California's hotspots. She is originally from the Midwest, but moved to Southern California back in 2014 with her husband and two small kids. When that winter weather just proved to be too much for the last time, they packed up and moved. She is also intensely passionate about helping others and helping others navigate through burnout. She's passionate about music and all things 80s. Dr. Martinez, it's so great to have you here today. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I just have to say thank you for your service. Everybody, in the intro, you heard that Dr. Martinez has been on the front lines of COVID-19. And I can't tell you how grateful I am for your service in being there and being brave and courageous and selfless. And all of that goes along with being a nurse and caring for others. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
This is the part of the show where we get to have the big reveal as to what song we're going to be talking about today from the 80s. So can I get a drum roll, please? Dr. Martinez, what is the song that best resonates with the story you're going to tell us today?
She blinded me with science.
Ha Yes, so apropos. Amazing song. And that's Thomas Dolby,
Yes.
1982.
Yes.
So we're bringing it in early 80s. And I did a little research on that song because that's what I do. And that's honestly, guys, my favorite part of my role here as an interviewer is doing my research on 80s music. And I always listen to the music several times before I jump into a podcast as part of my prep. And I have the song in my head playing. And you guys all need to either pause right now and listen or listen to it right after the show because it's such a great song. But I did see that it ranks number 20 of 100 of the one-hit wonders and is one of the greatest songs of the 1980s.
Absolutely.
So well done. Well done.
Thank you.
All right. So Erica, I'd love to hear your story.
So, as I was trying to come up with songs related to the 80s, I came to this song a little bit differently because it helped me more remind me of who I was now, I suppose, than when I would have been. So, I was in my early, childhood when that song would have originally came out. And I do remember, immediately as I was going through lists of songs from the 80s, that one jumped out at me. And I think that I always knew I wanted to be a nurse, but I've been struggling in, this kind of train wreck that has been 2020 and now shifting into 2021 with all things coronavirus. And what helped me kind of pick that song or where I came back to it is challenges around, whether or not there's science, I guess, or reality or whatever that is related to the virus being real, or whether or not people should have vaccinations. And as a young girl, I think science and math were kind of my strong suits. So it always kind of brought me back to if I was going to best show up as myself, I tended to pick things that showcased, I guess, kind of traditional, I guess, academic pursuits. I was a good student. I think I tried really hard, but school, in a sense, came a little bit naturally. And then it didn't really occur to me, I guess, um, that I was necessarily different or strange or weird. And that's kind of, I guess, the beauty of the 80s is that you can be kind of whatever you want to be. Not that kids don't get ostracized or feel strange or weird, but it was a little bit embracing, I guess, of that to me. And in coming, I guess, full circle, as I give you my story about that, it helped me really kind of refine my center. I needed, I guess, a remembrance from the 80s because it's a happy time to me. Being a kid, I found a lot of happiness and joy in that time period that the song would have come out in. And as I started kind of, as stories work, right? As I started remembering that, I started to have a sense of other stories that came to me that were more tied to the 80s and just different happy moments that listening to each of the songs. I had found like a playlist for 80s after that. So whether it's that one, as horrible days that I might have, can kind of bring me back out of it.
Wow. Wow. Isn't it interesting the process of picking an 80s song that best represents a story or an experience that you had? It really does go down a labyrinth
Oh, yes.
of, of 80s songs. Like I would look up, The Cure. Next thing you know, I'm listening to the Smiths. Next thing you know, it's been such a pleasure and entertaining to revisit the songs and revisit the messages in the song. And it's so powerful that you picked Blinded Me with Science, because we have, and especially the scientists like yourself, we've a layperson here, has been blinded by science, right? This has been an incredible time as far as just, the pandemic and what we're learning. For some doctors I've talked to, like yourself, it's been a very interesting thing. They've been learning a lot about the science behind the virus, right?
Yes.
And that's been interesting. As devastating as it's been very interesting.
It is. I have inherently. I like to be intrigued by different things. So it has certainly opened up a wealth of opportunities to learn new information and learn new ways of treatment, different than they would have been. Very recent, even of how I would have maintained things. And it's because it's new. I'm learning almost every day something new.
Wow. Wow. And tell us, Dr. Martinez, being on the front lines and where you are, one of the hot spots, right?
Mhm.
Tell us, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us just your experience. How do you get up every, day that you work in the hospital? How do you do it? Like, how do you get the strength to do it?
So inherently, I think there's a sense that you have to decide like what your role, I guess, is going to be in that day. One of the things that's the most challenging, and I guess I have the beauty of being a nurse for a long time versus nurses that are newer to the field and then have this be
Oh,
their only
yeah.
experience, is that
Right.
I'm only going to be able to have a finite number of things I'm going to be able to accomplish in a given
Mhm.
day. And at this time, and when you pick your field, you kind of have to think of like, well, what is it that I think I'm going to be able to do today, or how can I measure that I've done what I intended to do? And for
Yes.
me, I try to leave things a little bit better than I found them. Right. So certainly, whatever that is that I walk into, and I have a little bit of a unique role. I'm a rapid response nurse most of the time, which means I get calls before COVID-19, most of it was we would have strokes that would come in and we would quickly assess and treat. In the era of COVID-19, more and more of them are patients that are already in the hospital, maybe not in an intensive care type setting, but in a regular room, if, not on a ventilator, not requiring as many kind of high technology kinds of things.
Yes.
And then respiratory wise and breathing, COVID-19 attacks that most. And so they're not doing as well as either they had been, and it can shift very rapidly. And so for me, I'm kind of walking in there in a sense every morning of, okay, I'm going to not be able to do all the things I want maybe. So I'm going to make this day less awful for other people. Sometimes that's not for the patient necessarily, although that's always a little bit, right, who I am there for. But most of the time in my role as rapid response nurse, I think I'm there more to hold space for other people. And so a lot of times a newer nurse calls me because they just don't know what to do. And even if there isn't a lot we can do, other than we can always make somebody more comfortable, but outside of that, there might not be technology, or the patient might have chosen to forego those kinds of technologies or assistance. And so I'm there for more emotional support and trying to work with those other nurses. And then I have to kind of just keep in mind of that's why I was there that day. Right. And I'm not, there's a lot of those are more of those lately than I'd like for there to be. Right. So those are very challenging.
Yes.
But for me, it's helpful if I helped it suck less for that new grad. So even if it sucked a little bit for me, I feel like I'm the grown up, if you will, kind of in that situation, right?
Yes.
I'm a natural teacher. I also educate. It's more of, can I make this a little bit less awful for you? Because I really don't want them to leave. I am horrified at the idea that there will be a mass exodus of nurses at the conclusion of these, or even in the midst of this, because it's just so awful.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yes. Isn't that incredible? Dr. Martinez, I can't imagine holding the space for people for hope, holding the space for those people just to survive, the nurses to survive, the people who are being inundated. I can only imagine. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like, quite frankly. I only get what's on the news and what I hear from my doctor friends, right? And luckily I get to talk to you today and learn more. And I'm grateful for that. But how incredible is it that you are there to hold the space for them, and as a leader, as a grown-up. And what's interesting is we did the VIA Strengths. So Dr. Martinez did the VIA Strengths character assessment. And for those of you that don't know about this, definitely check it out. It'll be in the show notes. It really is 24 unique characteristics that describe you to your core. And what I love about it, VIA stands for values in action. What I love about it is that by having this knowledge, when we have obstacles like what Dr. Martinez has experiences on a daily basis in her role, she can draw upon and lean into those strengths to help her. And in her case, help support the nurses who are on those front lines as well. She's on the front lines, but then she's also has the added responsibility of caring for the nurses as they care for the patients on top of her patients. So I would love for you to tell us your top 5, Dr. Martinez, if you don't mind sharing that information.
Sure. My number 1 is gratitude. Number 2 is spirituality. 3 is love of learning. 4 is perspective. And 5 is kindness.
Yes, beautiful. Okay, so let's talk about this. Audience, if you guys were going to could pick your nurse, right? You're sick, you're in desperate times, you're in the hospital. Would you not want these strengths? Gratitude, spirituality, love of learning, perspective, and kindness. In that, Erica, I have her 10. She also's got love, creativity, fairness, bravery, which she's dialing in, leaning into a lot right now, and leadership, which she's leaning into right now as well. So what's interesting with gratitude is that it's, and I'm getting this, guys, just so to I'm getting this from Dr. Nemec's book on character strengths interventions. And for gratitude, life satisfaction, happiness, connected to the meaning of life, connected to work as a calling. So people who are high in gratitude see work more as a calling. Isn't that interesting? And for spirituality, love this information, is associated with life meaning. So once again, this is going along with gratitude. It's linked to compassion and altruism. And if you heard Dr. Martinez speak, she is all about how she can help the greater good. And that speaks to her spirituality as one of her top strengths. In addition to that, she's got love of learning. And wouldn't you know, she picked Blinded Me with Science. And clearly she has a love for science and the love of learning science. And she's also an educator. I'd love to know, Dr. Martinez, how do you use love of learning as a frontline essential worker right now?
So most days I have time in my day to try to help educate on the things that I also like to learn about. So, right now during COVID-19, it's what is the newest evidence-based practice that's going to help our patients in the most ways. I like to, proning is where we put patients on their bellies. So in general, you might think about having a patient on their, if you think of somebody in a hospital bed, they're laying on their back. You're not really thinking about them. So proning, the best way I can describe it is more like tummy time for adults. Although we can do it with babies too, but it helps with gravity. It will help the patient to better oxygenate. Most of this, I said, is like lungs and breathing and air. And so using that practice can help the patient to survive and also to get better, not just survive, but to get better, to be able to get out of the hospital, all those things. And learning how to do that safely and all of the different kinds of things that go along with it. That was a different, there's some, I've worked in critical care for, most of my career. So we certainly used the practice a little bit in other places that I've worked, but it is a mainstay when it comes to COVID-19, even if the patient is healthy enough to be able to do it themselves. So even if somebody was like at home and things like that, they could certainly, I am not providing medical expertise or guidance or anything like that today, but if they looked through some of the benefits of how do I take care of myself when I've chosen, I'm not sick enough necessarily to go to the hospital, but I'm not feeling my best and I have this and I'm at home, right? They could look into that for themselves. And
that's great.
Certainly would find information about it. But that was something that intrigued me, new practices for how we, medication wise, or just learning different practices or techniques or things with the physicians that I work closely with. And then also sharing that. So like I have my own passion and love for learning, but also sharing that with, like I said, I have less experienced nurses, or they'll call me kind of for guidance. There's protocols that my role is allowed to follow because I have a, different training than what some of the other nurses are able to do. And so I share with them kind of like my vantage point when I walk into a room and kind of how I assess a situation and what I think is kind of going on. We try to, when I have time, go through that process kind of with a newer nurse or just, differently experienced a nurse than I might be, and kind of what that looks like.
Yes, that's interesting because perspective is one of your top strengths as well. And with perspective, that's what you're being called in to do in those situations. You have such vast knowledge and the experience on top of it. So your love of learning, and then also the experience that you've had throughout the years, coupled with that strength of perspective, I can see how incredibly beneficial that is. And not to mention that, what's interesting, research shows with perspective, it actually helps buffer against negative effects of stress and trauma. And, you guys being on the front lines are experiencing stress and trauma on a regular basis. And how great for you to dial into perspective that might help buffer some of that as well.
Yes.
Um, Something else about perspective that you might want to know about, which I love to see this because I've got perspective in mine as top 5 as well, is that perspective is about life engagement and is linked to successful aging. So I'm
I
going
like that.
to lean into that. As I got my very first pair of reading glasses, I am going to lean into perspective. At least I have glasses that I can see now and
Yep.
study. My love of learning is also in my top, is actually my number one. And so, yeah, so I luckily I can read. So, Dr. Martinez, I'd love to hear your perspective and your action item for our audience, really looking at, how you shared a little bit of how you do it, how you get up and how you know, not only survive the day, but then also in the in an altruistic way, you're helping so many patients and the nurses on top of it. What would you give? What would your advice would you have for us, or action items would you have for us to take in effect immediately?
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about this as part of coronavirus, but as I've thought about the words that come to mind as I've been talking and we've been discussing, and it's all about breathing. And so,
Wow.
um, you know, all of these things, coronavirus attacks respiratory system, talking about that kind of part. But so, along with breathing, I had something that I kind of had generally just said, like, practice the pause. So over the next few days, anytime you're feeling yourself kind of overwhelmed, out of control, that you really think about, you have time. That's the thing that even when they call a code, or even when I'm trying to do, you're putting out a lot of gear when I'm going into a coronavirus room. There is time, yet not necessarily to, maybe I physically pause for a moment as I'm trying to do it, but I can take deep breaths as my transition, right? So
Wow.
over those, next course of time, I feel overwhelmed, I'm out of control, or I'm transitioning, is that I take a moment, I pause, I take a deep breath. If you're me, then you might choose to pray. And high
Hmm.
on the line of spirituality for me, that would be something that I
Yes.
spend time doing. May or may not resonate for anybody listening, but most important is that you're taking that just a second, right, for yourself, and
Hmm.
that you have time to take deep breaths.
Hmm.
For me, that helps me to ground back in, keeps me present, it keeps me where I'm at and in the moment, and not
Yes.
taking me out of it. And we need oxygen. So for me,
Yes.
it's real. There's so many different pieces of that seem so simple,
Hmm.
to just take and count to 5 as you inhale, and then
Yes.
slowly exhale at the same count of 5. I try to do it
Yes.
5 times, depending on whether or not I really, again, and especially if I'm high anxiety driven, it may force me to slow down. Like if I force
Yes.
myself into this slow inhalation, if I'm already a little anxious walking into a situation, I'm overwhelmed, whatever that part would be, is that it may just pattern disrupt enough to kind of
Yes.
pull you back out of that and into the moment of, okay, wait, I am where I am right now, and I can move my way through this.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And I think, all of us, no matter what is going on, and everyone's in a different situation. Everyone's got their own level of stress. I can imagine. And I definitely feel like breathing is so essential. And I've been trying to practice that more myself. And even in child pose,
Mm-hmm.
doing breathing into my back,
Mm-hmm.
which, as I understand, as you told us, is so beneficial to get, to open up the pathways, uh, that way as well. So, I mean, I know with all your hazmat, all your gear on, you don't have the option of child pose, but it's so great that, you tune into the spirituality, prayer, taking the breath, taking pause. I think that's something that really has been hard for me to learn over the years, is really the pause, and listening. And I've been through this time. I've had so much time to reflect. I've had so much time for pause that I've, when we get back to quote normal, I really intend on continuing the pause, continuing to have that time to reflect, because we get so much knowledge, and we receive so much knowledge that way. So great. So great. All right, audience, we have our marching orders. We're going to breathe. I think all of us, whether you can do this today, let's do it today. Let's do it today. Whenever you listen to this podcast, soon as you finish, you got to listen to Blinded Me with Science, and then take some breaths, maybe after the song, because it would be hard to, bop your head and dance around while you're breathing. So let's do it. Let's all of us take that pause today and breathe, and let's send prayer, if you pray, or positive vibes out there to all of our essential workers, especially our frontline nurses. 100%. Let's just give that energy out to them, and gratitude for our nurses. So thank you again for being here, and sharing your story. This is the part of the show where we get to talk about 80s trends. So I would love to hear, as you were taking that trip down memory lane, do you have any favorite 80s trends?
I think like just bright colors, like just ridiculous things that you'd put together for clothing. And just, if I look at like workout,
Yes.
just absolutely kind of silly now to me. I'd also thought of like, I don't know that I enjoyed big hair, but big hair was definitely something
Yes.
that also happened. But I guess it just seemed, again, I don't want to, there certainly are, everybody had their own personalities, and there would certainly have been outsiders. And I can't say that there wouldn't have been this thing that you may not have felt included. But at the same time, I feel like it was a very freeing, like just anything goes.
Yes.
That,
Yes.
yeah, it seems
Being
just
different
much
was
more
cool.
open.
Being different was cool, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
to be your own eccentric, self, yeah, and permission to kind of push that line.
Yes.
Because we had people who were pushing the line, like Madonna, and then you look at movies like The Breakfast Club, where
Yep.
you get that, all the stereotypes together in detention, and then you look at, Pretty in Pink, and
Mm-hmm.
those movies where you have such diverse characters, and yet all of them endearing.
Absolutely.
So great. Well, Dr. Martinez, again, it's so great to have you here today. And I would love our audience to be able to find you. What would be the best way to get a hold of you?
So Burn Brighter, Not Out, is my website. That's also a Facebook page. I think that is the easiest way to kind of get a sense of who I am. There's ways to contact me through there. And certainly my crowd, I guess, that I tend to work with often is frontline workers as well, or other nurses. But certainly I have worked with others. It certainly, as we mentioned, kind of that idea of practicing a pause and deep breaths, that's not unique to nursing. So I guess all I would say is if you feel like you resonated and you'd want to talk to me further, I never intend to exclude anyone. And so if you're inclined and you feel, compelled to kind of reach out and connect, then please do. And don't think that there isn't a place for you, whether you're a nurse or you're not a nurse.
100%, because burnout happens in a lot of fields,
Absolutely.
and especially right now when we're all being forced to pivot and we're all being forced to get outside our comfort zones in many ways. And so yes, I think I've checked out your website. It's beautiful. It's so great, and it really does give everyone a sense of who you are and what amazing work you bring to the world. So, so much gratitude for you being here today. Thank you again.
Thank you. I'm just delighted that you asked, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to kind of revisit the 80s and preparing for kind of today brought to me.
Very good. Well, until next time.